Hey, welcome to yet another one of my videos, folks. In today's video, I figured once I've already done my Xbox One video, I might as well tell you folks how you can play your older console games in a higher resolution potentially, or at the very least in terms of a higher fidelity of the video picture, so that you don't have to actually go out and buy necessarily like a newer version of your console to be able to enjoy your older games. Now, specifically, I'm referring to Xbox 360, original Xbox, potentially PS2, GameCube, Nintendo Wii, or even Wii U, games that you can actually enhance and make them look a lot better than what they were originally. Now, a lot of you folks are probably familiar with the M Cable. Now, the M Cable is obviously by Marseille. They had the video cable for a while, but more recently they came out with the gaming edition. Now, the gaming edition promised to give us slightly sharper anti-aliasing than what was available with the video processor that they had before. Now, this one is supposed to be a lot better, and I've actually had the chance to really test this out in the PSVR, and I've also had a chance to test it out with a number of different games consoles, and it does do what they say for the most part, and you can kind of notice it. But the issue is that for the most part it works better on sort of the 360, PlayStation 3 era of games, and PS4 and Xbox One. Doesn't really work so much on, the most recent version of the Xbox One X and the PlayStation 4 Pro, which already offer a lot of the sort of same features that this essentially allows you to have. Meaning, because the Xbox One X and the PlayStation 4 Pro tend to basically downsample from a higher resolution when you're using a display that can't perform a 4K resolution, they'll be able to give you basically the same effect of having better anti-aliasing, and by and large the games that do run on the Xbox One X and PlayStation 4 Pro take advantage of better anti-aliasing or additional anti-aliasing on top of what would have been possible with the original launch consoles. But also, this cable doesn't necessarily seem to work so well on the original Xbox, PS2, and GameCube, where the aliasing was actually so bad due to the original really low resolution that there's really not this much that this cable can do, simply because the original quality of the picture is already quite bad. So while this works for the more recent consoles, and it does do its job fairly well, and also allowing you to pass through 120 Hz, which is pretty impressive, because for those of you that, may be using this cable on the PC, you get the advantage of having additional anti-aliasing without, it being on the hardware side of things, meaning that potentially if your PC is not as beefy and you can't afford to spend the extra $200 or $300 on a better card, this, roughly $80 solution now can net you the benefit of higher FPS with, basically just running this cable and still being able to run your 120 Hz monitor. Now, of course, the downside is that you won't be able to use something higher like 160 or 180 Hz monitor, but it does pretty well for the most part in that respect. But what this thing doesn't really do is it doesn't necessarily improve the picture quality of what you're seeing on screen. Now, the Marseille website will tell you things like we do improve the colors and color accuracy and all this stuff, and they'll give you a bunch of, basically marketing mumbo-jumbo. But for the most part, what this cable is really meant to do is be a substitute for an anti-aliasing solution that either doesn't exist with the original software, or basically the console isn't able to handle it, and that's essentially what this thing was made for. And that's all fine and dandy, but like I said, because for the original consoles it doesn't actually necessarily make that big of a difference, and because it doesn't actually improve the picture quality, what can you do if you want to improve the picture quality of those games without necessarily buying, an upgraded console, or without, having to resort to modifying it in some way to get that additional horsepower out of it, like you could do, for example, with the original Xbox. So the solution is actually a different one entirely, and it's basically this little box called the Darbee. Now, the actual name I don't recall off the top of my head, because there's a unit number for this one, but I'll give you guys a link in the description to the Amazon page where I bought it, and also you can just visit the Darbee website and they'll have it on there as well. So you might think, well, what the heck is this? Is this another gimmick? What does this thing actually do? And this thing is not a gimmick, and it actually does improve the depth of the image that you see, because it does its processing on a per pixel basis. Potentially the Marseille cable can do something similar. Perhaps it does do it, but not to the same degree as the Darbee does. And unlike the M cable, which basically comes with a single preset, you actually have different presets on this specific unit. You have the ability to turn on gaming mode, you have the ability to turn on video mode, as well as one more mode that I can't quite recall off the top of my head, but they basically change the way the picture looks and they emphasize different things. Some of them, like I said before, emphasize the depth of the image, some bring the colors out a little bit more, and others tend to clear up the background so that it's a little bit sharper. And you can also adjust the amount of the effect from anywhere from 0% all the way up to 100, so you can tweak the effect to your own liking to see how well it works with the specific game that you're running or the movie that you're playing. This was originally designed primarily to make basically projectors and older Blu-ray players and DVD players look a little bit better than they potentially could originally. Now, at $180, it's a fairly tall order. Certainly, if you're one of those folks that's looking to upgrade your console, potentially, especially with the trade-in programs that are happening nowadays, you could just save a little bit more money and basically just get yourself a new console. But this will work with all of your original consoles so long as you have an HDMI cable. And now that there's been such a huge resurgence in HDMI cables for the older generation consoles, there's basically no reason not to get this and enjoy a higher quality picture if you want the nostalgia of playing on the original console itself without using an emulator. So what does it actually do? Well, I couldn't quite tell you. They get really technical on their website, and I am not exactly a video processing guru, so I couldn't explain all the different details. But what I can tell you that it does is it makes basically everything pop a lot more. Now, especially on consoles like the original Xbox and the PlayStation 2, where you basically had, potentially a lot of this sort of fog effect, sort of fog of war. This tends to clear this up a little bit. What it also does is it basically does a kind of an isotropic filtering on all of the textures that you see within video games. And this is nice because on the original Xbox and certainly the PS2, the textures were quite muddy. So having something that brings a little bit of that depth into the textures and makes them look a little bit sharper is a huge boon, because it actually does make the image quality that much better, and again, without having to have, sort of any additional hardware within the console itself to make it look nicer. All this is just a plug-and-play box as long as you have an HDMI cable. And it is HDMI pass-through, so it is entirely, just passive in the chain, right up until you send the HDMI signal to it, and then it starts doing its magic. Now, you also have an IR sensor in here, so that you can actually control with a little remote, basically the picture quality settings that you want to have. It does also require additional external power to run. It's a little bit unfortunate, but that's the price you pay for having a higher image quality in general. Now, towards the end of this video, I'm actually going to show you guys some before and afters with this. And the really cool thing about the Darbee is that it's actually, able to give you a comparison mode where it has a slider that shows you exactly what changes have been made from the original image to the one that's been processed through this device itself. Now, I have had mixed results. Some games look really good, some games are only marginally improved, and in some games it doesn't make a huge difference. Now, obviously, the original resolution still, just like with the Marseille cable, makes the big impact at the end of the day. So if you end up having a console that was only rendering 640 by 480 or what have you, this is still only primarily going to affect the depth of the image and the basically texture quality a little bit. But as far as colors go, there is a slight improvement to colors, but not so much in gaming mode, more in the video mode, which you can select. Now, I'm also going to show that one off as well, so you can see for yourselves what kind of a difference it makes. But with that said, this thing is really quite priceless considering, what it's actually capable of doing. Because in a way, it's almost like having a remaster of a game without having, to actually go out and buy the remaster. And again, it will do this for every game. So some of those classics that maybe aren't released right now as an HD remaster, or that potentially haven't even made their way to the newer consoles, you can now play in enhanced quality, basically thanks to this little box. And again, the price of it is a bit of a tall order, but if you can swallow that, then ultimately at the end of the day, what you have is a device that works across all consoles in your library, and potentially even, your DVD and Blu-ray players as well, if you have an older version that, can't quite output the color quality that you want. Now, this device is also quite proven because there are actually projectors that incorporate this technology, and even Blu-ray players that incorporate Darbee technology into them, so you know that it really works, and it's not some kind of a joke that somebody's playing on you. It's not any kind of a trick, and you'll see when I launch the different games and show you the before and after, the actual impact that this thing makes. Now, of course, as with anything that improves quality, there is always a drawback. And the drawback with this one, unlike the M Cable, is the fact that you can only do 60 FPS with this, or 60 Hertz if we're looking at it that way, unlike the Marseille cable, which does 120. So unfortunately, there is that limit, and that also means that you're not going to be driving 3D through this box as well. So there's no driving the PSVR through this. You're not going to be playing 3D Blu-ray movies through this device, unfortunately, just due to the way that it is. You can try, but by and large I've had fairly poor results with this thing in the chain when you're trying to play 3D content. As far as everything else goes, however, it's been a really solid device. I've been using it with my original Xbox to make those original games look 10 times better than they used to before, and I'm not even kidding when I say this, because the improvement is quite drastic. By and large, what you will see is that there's more pop to everything that's going on. Everything looks a lot sharper. The games generally look like they've just had a huge touch-up done to them by the artist originally, because all it's doing is bringing out the best of the effects from the original engine, or specifically the original art content that was involved. So now that we've talked about this thing for a bit, let's take a look at some videos of this thing in action and see just how well it actually does. Okay folks, so here we are in Halo 2 now, and you can see I have the Darbee enabled, and you can also see that I'm using currently the full pop mode, and you can see just the difference between the stock wall on the left and the one on the right, that the one on the right has a little bit more definition to it. Now we can try the high def mode, which I think doesn't do as much. As you can see, it's obviously a lot less noticeable as to what's actually going on. Now we can also do the gaming mode, which again I think also kind of makes it look a little bit better, but I think personally that the full pop method actually does a lot more for the game as a whole. I'm going to try and see if I can kind of do some more, different sections of the game that are a little bit better lit, so you can again sort of tell the difference. Here it's not the most apparent. Now observe over here as we take a look at Master Chief's armor and just how much more definition it gains when the sweep comes over to the right. Pretty huge difference. Also the crates over there you can see are doing a much better job. In general, the depth of the images, especially in the little walls over there, you can see a lot more definition as the sweep comes over to the right. So let's now try also gaming mode and see what difference that makes. I feel like this one is not quite as pronounced as the other one, although it still makes a difference, as you can see. Now we can try high definition mode, which I think doesn't do quite as much, but it's still a fairly decent amount in terms of what, it is. I feel like the full pop mode definitely does a little bit of a better job, however, as far as that's concerned. So now let's take a look at a couple more different games. Okay, so now here we are in Half-Life 2, and again I'm doing the full pop sweep here, and you can see that as soon as it swipes over to the right, there's just a lot more definition and depth to Barney. He seems to become a lot more pronounced, as does the console and all of the buttons on it. You can see, significant difference in terms of clarity that is added to the overall image. It feels like it takes away some of that fog that is normally there, and certainly if you take a closer look at him, you will see just how much his face resolves when we do put this on. It's almost as if the anisotropic filter is running. Now again, it's not going to make a massive world of difference, but it's enough to really bring the pop out to the game to make it seem truly worthwhile. So now let's go into high definition mode. Alright, so you can see again there's a fairly decent improvement there, and then here's the gaming mode, just so you can see that one. Alright, so let's take a look at this Combine Soldier here, and you will see that there is a slight difference in the way that he looks. Obviously he's a little bit upset right here, but as you can see, even just the ground textures are also improved
when you take a look at them, even ever so slightly, but nonetheless it is an improvement that you can still see, and it makes the colors of everything just come out a little bit more than they otherwise would. Now obviously the fact that the textures are fairly low quality means that there's not much that this system can do in this particular game, but you can see even on this drink machine that it does make a fairly clear difference in terms of the text resolution itself. You can see it a little bit better, it pops a little bit more, and on the wall textures themselves you can see that a lot more of the detail is actually brought to life using the Darbee system versus on the right what you see, which it isn't. Okay, and so here we are outside now, and again you can see that when the sweep comes to the right, that a lot more definition is brought out in the windows in the far. It looks a lot crisper, a little bit darker. A lot more of the colors are actually brought to life. You get a little bit more of the color gamut happening, which obviously is a nice improvement over the stock visuals. And again, you can see that when the sweep comes to the left, the far objects are a lot less sharp than they are when the sweep comes over to the right. Again, this is part of the fact that they do, this per pixel recalculation that allows them to basically make the objects in the back pop a little bit more, and that just makes all the difference. So here we are in Forza, and this time around you can see that the text in the background is becoming just a little bit more clear as we're looking. The grass is becoming slightly greener. You can see that also the tarmac becomes a little bit more crisp as well when the sweep comes over to the right. You can see a lot more of the details are brought in. You can also see that when you look at the car itself, that the car has just a little bit more definition to it when the sweep comes over to the right. So if we do a little bit more and actually take the car out for the race, you can see a little bit more of the map and see the sweep come across and do its thing. Again, just looks really crisp, really clear. And I personally think that this makes a pretty significant difference, and while it's not going to get rid of the aliasing, which is quite significant in these games, you can see just how much of an impact it does make. And I am terrible at this game because I haven't played in absolutely forever. But again, you can just see from the way the Darbee system is working, it makes quite an improvement on the general look of the title. The colors become a little bit more vibrant, which is certainly not the case in the stock console. Now you can probably, arguably, go into the settings and adjust saturation to the amount that you see with the Darbee, or potentially even higher, but again, just the fact that you don't have to mess around with any settings to get this sort of effect does make quite the difference. And personally, I think it's enough of a difference that it's worthwhile. Now, the next thing I'm going to try and do is I'm going to run through the same games, but instead of using the Darbee, we're going to put on the M Cable and see if the M Cable actually makes enough of a qualifiable difference. So at this point, I am now running with the M Cable, and you can see the only real discernible difference is that now the jaggies are slightly less of a problem than they used to be before. Now, it's by no means amazing still, but it is, however, a fairly decent, amount of improvement over the stock title. You can see again that the general look of the car is slightly less, triangular. You can see that the edges are a little bit more smoothed over, but unfortunately you don't get that same effect of the pop that you originally had with the Darbee. And again, that just owing to the fact that this particular cable primarily serves to do the one thing, which is just basically to smooth out some of those jaggies, and that's pretty much about it. You don't see an improvement in color, you don't really see an improvement in how far you can see in the title. Basically, the only things you're seeing is an improvement in the quality of anti-aliasing over the stock amount. Once again, we're looking at Master Chief's armor here, and we're looking at the triangles around it, specifically the much smoother now look of his armor and the weapons that are around him, as well as on the palm trees and the buildings up ahead of us. There's definitely a marked improvement from what was happening before. Now, if we go ahead and do a zoom in, we can see again that there is a slight improvement across the board of the jaggies being removed in Halo 2 using the M Cable. Okay, and here we are in Half-Life 2 yet again, and you can see that once again that the buildings in the background are not nearly as sharp as they are with the Darbee. You can also see that the power lines are a little bit less jaggy, as are the buildings that are sort of further away. Now, typically speaking, what you would see is a marked improvement in the newer titles. So for example, games on the Xbox 360 are going to see an improvement, and games on the PlayStation 3 as well as on your PC, you're not going to see nearly as big of an improvement on the original Xbox or the PlayStation 2 consoles, mainly due to the fact that, again, the lower resolution there provides far too many jaggies for this system to effectively fix. But as you can see, it still nonetheless looks a little bit better, although it would be my opinion that the Darbee is still the superior way to go, just owing to the fact that you can actually improve the look of the textures in the game, and the fact that everything that is further away actually looks a lot sharper than it is. And that's going to be it for this video as far as the games go. I'm going to try and do a 360 and PlayStation 3 comparison later on.
So now that you folks have seen the Darbee in action, I want you to let me know what you think. Do you think that ultimately this device is something that you would want to consider getting? Do you think that it makes enough of a difference in your opinion as far as the picture quality goes to make it worthwhile? Or do you think that you would still rather just play on something like an emulator or wait for a revised version of the game to come out? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know if you're interested in purchasing the Darbee at some point in the future, and in the meantime, please do like and subscribe so I can bring you more amazing content like this. Take care until the next video.